to the Green Screen. My name is Taylor White and I'm a project manager here at 360 Energy Group. I'm joined here today with Bryan Tillman, our electric vehicle expert. Welcome, Bryan.
Thank you.
Can you give us a quick overview on electric vehicles?
Absolutely. So electric vehicles are actually vehicles that have been around for quite a while. We actually have had electric vehicles going back 100 years ago.
Wow.
The internal combustion engine became much more popular for the last 100 or so years, and now we're seeing a resurgence of electric vehicles. We do think of electric vehicles as the vehicles that you and I drive around, and that is what the focus of our conversation will be surrounding today. But we also have to think about electric vehicles are much more than just vehicles you and I drive around. It could be an electric scooter, and it could be an electric train like we see with high-speed rail going 200 plus miles an hour through Europe and China and other places. But basically an electric vehicle is going to be your typical vehicle that you and I drive around, but with large battery and being powered off of electricity versus gasoline.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that recap. I know there's a lot of components that make up electric vehicles, so can we start off by asking, what is the difference between a level 1, a level 2, and a DC charger?
Wonderful question. So I want to kind of start this off by just talking a little bit about the vehicles. The vehicles themselves play into how fast you can charge and what level of electricity is accepted by the charge station itself. So some vehicles charge faster, some vehicles charge slower. Also, some vehicles do have a different level of efficiency. So a larger vehicle may get fewer miles per kilowatt hour than a smaller vehicle. I also want to mention that vehicles do sit idle 95% of the time. So they sit idle all night long, they sit idle while you're at work. We're typically driving 25 to 50 miles a day. Of course, a lot of times we're going on trips and we're driving further, but because these vehicles do sit idle for such a long amount of time, people do get hung up on how fast these vehicles do charge. But if you have these vehicles sitting in your garage for 10 hours at night, they've got a lot of time to charge. So with that, let's talk about the different levels of charging.
Sounds good.
So level 1 charger is 120 volt typical household outlets. And it's just something that people can plug into very easily. These usually add 3 to 5 miles of range for every hour that the car is plugged in. So this could be in your garage at home. Sometimes you'll see them at like a train station where somebody goes to work all day and comes back. A few places like that. These are also more common for range extended electric vehicles or plug-in hybrids because those vehicles have smaller batteries and they have gas backup. So if they do need to go further, they have that capability. We're going to go in and talk about level 2 charge stations, which are 240 volts. These charge stations provide anywhere from 10 to 70 miles of range while the car is plugged in, and that's per hour. I typically see those around 20 to about 45 miles of range that's added per hour that you're plugged in, but you can get some that are actually faster than that. These stations are typically used for home charging, especially for somebody that has a full battery electric vehicle without any level of a gas backup. We also see level 2 chargers very commonly at hotels, workplaces, and if you're driving around and you see a charge station, you typically are seeing level 2 stations. Those are the most common charge stations that we see. But then you also have the DC fast chargers. Those are 480 volt, and those stations are expensive, and they are not ones that you're going to typically see in your garage. These are the ones that you see along the highway if someone's driving across country. You also do see some of these in urban centers, so maybe near a grocery store or a gym or somewhere that somebody may stay for a little bit of time, and that the ones that are at those locations are a lot of times used for somebody that maybe lives in a multifamily building. They don't have access to the charger, so they can kind of charge while they're grabbing groceries or while they're going to the gym. Let's talk about how fast these DC fast chargers are.
Yeah.
So these can range significantly as well. So you have some of the ones that typically start off at about 24 kilowatts for the fast charge, and those will get about 100 miles per hour that you're plugged in. But then you have some that are coming out now. Tesla has rolled out one that gets about 250 kilowatts, which basically means you get about 75 miles in about 5 minutes. So those are incredibly fast, And we also keep hearing about faster and faster chargers. As we electrify more of our vehicles, you're going to see a greater mix of different charging levels integrated into this.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Bryan. I think our next question is something that everyone wants to know. Can you explain a little bit more about managed charging? You hear that everywhere, and I think our viewers definitely want to know what managed charging is.
Absolutely. So let's start with how we power our cars. As mentioned earlier, our cars do sit out at about 95% of the time, and for the average consumer, they probably only need to be plugged in for an hour or two. If you have a level 2 charger and you can get 25 miles of range per hour that you're plugged in, if your average commute's 25 to 50 miles per day that you're driving, you're only going to need to be plugged in for an hour or two.
Wow.
So what does that mean? That means that you have what would be considered kind of a flexible load. What you're able to do with a flexible load is you're able to tell it when to charge. You're going to add load to the grid at a time that is best to add it to the grid. So managed charging is the idea that we will encourage people to charge their vehicles when there's excess capacity on the grid. So think about when you get home at night. Say you get off work at 5, you're home at 6, you can plug in your car right away when you get home. But what you want to do is you want to set a timer for your vehicle to charge at, say, 1 a.m. when there's that excess capacity on the grid, because people are sleeping, people are not using a lot of electricity at that point in time. It is actually something that is a strategy that's being looked at to say, can we get people to start to charge when there's excess capacity on the grid, rather than during peak demand times. If you're plug in at 6 o'clock, you might be plugging in during that peak demand time. And what we're really looking at is, are there ways to incentivize people to charge off peak demand times, and also during times where there might be a lot of renewable energy on the grid.
Awesome, excellent. So for our next question, I know a lot of viewers probably have the same issue that I do, is I would love to have an electric vehicle, but I travel, I visit friends and family out of state, I'm driving far away. On average, how far can you drive with one charge?
Great question. So our first electric vehicle in 2012 got about 72 miles of range.
Okay. It's enough to get somewhere.
Yeah, which was a second car for us, but we still had a hybrid vehicle that we needed to keep, because if we did want to go further to visit friends and family, that 72 miles just couldn't get us quite there. Now we have a vehicle with over 300 miles of range, and that's the trend you're seeing. Is you're seeing that all of these vehicles are really starting to push 200 plus miles of range per charge. A lot of them have 300 plus miles of range. Currently, I think the longest range kind of commercially available electric vehicle has about 390 miles of range, but you keep hearing talk that we're going to break 400 miles of range probably this year. We call, when people are concerned about range anxiety, one of the things that
I can see that.
Yeah. One of the things that we're seeing is, as cars get larger batteries and more range, plus more charging infrastructure is being put in, that range anxiety is going away more and more. And most people that have electric vehicles really don't worry about it anymore. One thing that I do want to just lightly mention on the tail end of this, though, is that even when we do talk about the range that's available on a car, you have to remember that weather conditions can affect range. Just like with any other vehicle, in the middle of winter you may not get as many miles per kilowatt hour or miles per gallon.
Awesome. So for these people who want to take an electric vehicle and they want to go on a road trip and they don't have range anxiety, how much would it cost to charge the electric vehicle on the road as opposed to filling up a car with gas?
That's a great question. So I'll give you a couple scenarios. So if we're going on a road trip, DC fast chargers right now, they range in price. What I've typically seen is that they come in at about 26 cents per kilowatt hour. Okay. So if I wanted to fill up for about 300 miles, that comes in at about $19.50, or about 6.5 cents per mile driven. Now, just to make a note, if you're charging at home, which is where most people do charge, and you're doing your kind of daily drive, not across the country, if you're at 10 cents a kilowatt hour, you're looking at about $7.50 to fill up for 300 miles of range, which is about 2.5 cents per mile driven. And if you actually went to kind of more time of use scenario where you are charging at night when rates are lower, you can bring that down to probably somewhere in the $6 range to fill up, or about 2 cents per mile driven. So
Excellent.
it's significantly less than
Yeah.
an internal combustion engine vehicle filling up with gasoline.
That's amazing. One of our last questions is how can we incorporate the renewable energy to electrical vehicle charging infrastructure?
Absolutely. So a lot of that goes into kind of the fact that these vehicles are flexible loads. So if you have renewable energy being produced, let's just say it's during the day or it's at nighttime, you can actually time these vehicles to charge at the time when rates are lowest. And you're seeing more and more of kind of this real-time integration where you get a price signal put in, and then your car will start to charge at the time that that signal is being sent to the car. So that's still kind of in the early stages, but that is something that's coming down the road, and we anticipate that growing and being accepted by the market.
Excellent. Okay, Bryan, for our last question, I think this is just a general question that everyone wants to know. How much electricity does an electric car use?
Wonderful question. So electric vehicles do vary in efficiency. So just to provide one example here is if you have a vehicle that gets 4 miles per kilowatt hour and you drive 14,000 miles a year, that vehicle will use about 3,500 kilowatts a year. Now, if you had a different vehicle, maybe it's a little bit larger, an SUV, something along those lines that gets 3 miles per kilowatt hour, you're going to use about 4,700 kilowatts for that same number of miles, 14,000 miles.
Awesome. Well, Bryan, thank you so much for joining us today. I know our viewers are really interested in electric vehicles. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any questions about electric vehicles or want to learn how to get more involved with energy efficiency or electric vehicles, please feel free to contact us at info@360eg.com. Thanks for joining.